Thank you so much, Michela. Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Soul, and this is my lovely partner, Kendra. And as you can see on the screen today, we will be talking about sex trafficking in the African American community. And I'll pass it over to my partner, Kendra, so she can introduce herself and we can get right into the presentation.
So hello everyone, my name is Kendra Bryant and I am a member and a Hyatt ambassador, and I'm really excited to meet everyone today, and I really hope that you enjoy the presentation.
So let's get into it. So again, I am Soul. My real name is Taylor though, and I'm 20 years old. I'm a singer-songwriter. I'm an ambassador for Heart Smiles and Haya. And at the bottom is just a few things that I've done. I work with CBS, Hip Hop Public Health, Johns Hopkins, etc.
And once again, hello everyone, my name is Kendra Bryant. I am 18 years old and I'm a freshman at Towson University, majoring in journalism. I am the creator of She's Not For Sale, which is a human trafficking awareness project that I completed about a year ago. I was a member of CHARM, Voices of Baltimore Youth. I've worked with Girl Scouts for over 10 years and Johns Hopkins Youth Summer Programs, and currently a part of the Tower Light newspaper publication.
So this is just today's agenda, give you guys an idea of what we're going to be really talking about today and really getting into what our conversation is going to be like. So before we really get into our presentation, we did want to put up a trigger warning because this topic is very, very heavy. So if this conversation, if this topic is triggering to you, if it hits home in any sort of way, please feel free to turn off your camera. Take a moment for yourself, take a step away, because like I said, and we will reiterate through the presentation, that this is a very serious and heavy topic. So now let's get into our conversation.
So before we begin with the informative portion, we really want to do an audience check-in, and everyone can feel free to put your response in the chat or even go ahead and take yourself off of mute to answer this question. So the question is, what crime do you believe African-American women fall victim to the most? And in reference to this question, we have a quote from the legend Malcolm X, which is, the most unprotected person in America is the Black woman, and the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. And I'm seeing comments in the chat: domestic violence, which is extremely serious when it comes to women, sexual assault.
And again, please feel free to take yourself off mute if that's something you feel comfortable with. We would love to hear you guys' answers as well. And we're just going to give this a few more minutes.
So these are all great responses, and they are definitely really high risk crimes that do occur in the African American community and also just in all communities of women. So great responses. Thank you for participating.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to move right along. So did you guys know that Maryland is ranked one of the worst states for human and sex trafficking? Why, you may ask? Because young girls ages 16 and under, if they are not willing or if they cannot identify their abusers or their traffickers, they can be sent to juvenile detention centers. And I know what you're thinking, like, why are these young girls who are clearly victims getting sent to juvenile detention centers? And this is why Maryland is like one of the worst states for human and sex trafficking. Other states, on the other hand, if young girls are found to be prostitutes or victims of sex trafficking or in the sex worker field and they are underage, they will get sent to rehabilitation centers. They will be sent to homes to help them recover and be met with their emotional needs and things like that. Whereas though in Maryland, these young girls pretty much get punished. They get punished for being victims of human and sex trafficking. Maryland is also in 44th place of the 50 states ranked for human and sex trafficking. And I know 44th place may not seem like a big deal, like, oh, it's just 44th place. But when we talk about human and sex trafficking, the second largest hidden crime in America, and knowing that when someone goes missing, it is very hard to locate them, especially in human and sex trafficking, because again, it is a hidden crime. Even though it is 44th place, it is still very much a big deal because young girls go missing every single day. And it is very hard to track them and locate them once they do go missing. So I just want you guys to keep that in the back of your minds as we go through this presentation. So Maryland is a hotspot. Maryland is a very dense and populated state, population being a little over 6 million people. So for traffickers, this is kind of like a candy store. They are able to really, scout their young girls or, look for their victims because Maryland is so populated. Also, Maryland is a state that is also connected to Virginia and DC, and they're connected by a beltway for 95, and it takes roughly 45 minutes to an hour to get to DC and Virginia. Now, I want to kind of clear up this assumption. Not all traffickers traffic their victims out of state. So I just wanted to make that very clear because some people who may have an idea of what human and sex trafficking is, you may think that, oh, they traffic their victims out of state or even out of the country. That is not necessarily the case. But if they wanted to, Maryland, again, is like a candy store to them because we are so heavily populated and we are connected to DC and Virginia. And we also have easy and cheap transportation. So these are also things I want you guys to keep in mind because this is, again, something that isn't talked about. Maryland is like a candy store for traffickers. So next we're going to get into specifically what is human trafficking.
So human trafficking's formal definition is a modern day form of slavery. Slavery is the rights, human rights being taken away from an individual and automatically becoming a source or a form of property to another individual. So in trafficking, they consider it to be a modern day form of slavery due to the fact that it's not only taking place personally and physically, it also happens to take place virtually. And by virtually, we mean through technology. In human trafficking, a lot of harsh labor, profitable sex acts are all taking place. But what makes it trafficking is that the trafficking victim does not receive any of the profit for the sexual acts or labor acts. All of the profit ultimately goes into the hands of the trafficker, so the person who is trafficking the victim. In human trafficking, like we said, human rights are taken away. So things such as freedom of speech, freedom of movement, using the restroom, rights of pay, and even meals and food are all guaranteed from the trafficker and not ultimately placed into the hands of the person who is being trafficked. So ultimately, you are property if you are a victim of human trafficking. So there are up to 27 different types of human trafficking, and that's just not in the US, that is all over the world. And in this presentation, we're really going to be focusing on sexual type of trafficking and also labor acts of trafficking. So here we have a display of different images for sexual trade, exploitation, and pornography. Pornography is a huge form of trafficking that is, highly under the radar and highly being reviewed in the industry as we speak, due to the fact that oftentimes we do not know if the people who are featured in these videos or pictures are doing this voluntarily or if they are in fact forced to do these acts. Massage parlors, brothels, and even nail shops are not only forms of sex trafficking, but also could be forms of labor trafficking, working a lot of hard hours without benefiting from the pay or receiving the correct amount of pay. Organ trading, which is something that's really becoming up under the radar as well, is basically when you are in a hospital or you are in a doctor's office and having a surgery performed, and your organs are ultimately being sold without your permission. Children soldiers is also a form of trafficking, along with forced marriage, which occurs heavily in a lot of different countries. And of course, well known to all is forced prostitution. So the relationship between a pimp and prostitute is quite similar to the relationship between a trafficker and a trafficking victim. So who is really at risk for trafficking? And here in the title, we have the word vulnerable. So vulnerable usually means, someone who is in need of something, someone who is lacking something. So traffickers really have an eye or have a good mental sketch for looking out for people who are vulnerable. So who is vulnerable? Runaway teens are heavily vulnerable. Victims of abuse, especially in relationships, that can also equate to having low values of self-esteem or low values of boundaries. Unrestricted social media users, which we will get into later in the presentation, that heavily correlates with the teenage population of trafficking. Poverty-stricken youth, as well as homeless youth. Unfortunately, the children in foster care are extremely at risk due to the fact that being placed into the wrong home could lead to extremely dangerous situations. Refugees and drug addicted and mentally ill individuals are oftentimes considered to be easily taken advantage of by traffickers. So who is most at risk of trafficking gender-wise? So this following statistics all apply for all races. This is not broken up by race at all. So as you can see, women are taking up 66% of the human trafficking rate. And this is not also for sex trafficking or labor trafficking. This is actually both. Women are coming in at higher than 50%, higher than half of the percentage is women. Girls, which is in fact anyone who is under the age of 18, is at 13%. Men, anyone over the age of 18, is 12%, and boys are coming in at 9%. So as you can see, correlating back to the opening question that we asked, who is most at risk? Obviously, you can see that females and women are highly at risk for being victims of human trafficking.
Now we have two charts that you can see that are broken down by race. So our previous chart, it was just lumped in as either women, men, boys, and girls. But now we have two charts here, which gives us kind of more info as to what it looks like when you break those statistics down by race. And you can see clearly that even though white people, how can I say this? When we look at human and sex trafficking, we usually see white people or white girls as the face of what human or sex trafficking looks like. But when we break it down by race, you can clearly see that Black people take the majority chunk, which is why we so heavily want to talk about this topic, because when you see advertisements, when you see movies, which is something we'll get into later in the presentation, we always see young white girls or white women being targeted or being trafficked. But then when we come back and we look at the statistics, we can clearly see that Black people, and this is just broken down by race, this isn't even based on sex. So clearly we see that Black people take majority of the chunk, and then followed behind is white people, Hispanics, Asians, and other. But then when we look at the chart on the right, we can clearly see that still women take up majority of the chunk, and this is labor trafficking, but we can kind of get an idea whether it is labor or sex trafficking. Women are going to come in first place when we talk about this topic. So this is why we keep reiterating that this is such an important topic to talk about, especially within our community, because when you look back over at this chart, you see that 40.4% of sex trafficking victims are Black. and that as a whole, Black women are targeted the most. So next, we're going to get into some warning signs. So what to look for if you may come across a woman or a young girl that is being trafficked. So appearing malnourished, avoiding eye contact, talking in a scripted manner, showing signs of physical injury, branding marks or tattoos. Now, showing signs of physical injury and branding marks or tattoos are two of the most noticeable and heavy signs of a young girl or a young woman potentially being a human traffic or sex trafficking victim. Now, one thing I do want to say is these are the two things to specifically look for, because a lot of traffickers often do change the appearance of their victims. That way, if someone does report them missing, these girls won't be easily identifiable. So some people may cut their hair, change their hair color. Some people will even put contacts in them, and again, branding marks or tattoos. So if you may be somewhere and you're seeing a young girl or a young woman, you're like, she doesn't look okay. She looks like she's in danger. She's very malnourished and she's really timid and quiet. Like she looks like she hasn't possibly eaten a meal in days, or she may be dirty. She may be a victim of human or sex trafficking. So if you see any of these, especially the physical injury and the branding marks or tattoos, please don't hesitate to call 911, or if she's allowing you, potentially try to talk to her to see if she'll give you any sign that she is a victim. Because again, we'll get into it later in the presentation, but a lot of these victims don't have any contact to home. Obviously, they don't get cell phone usage or anything. So you talking to this victim, you could be potentially saving their life in that moment. So if you see any of these things, don't hesitate to reach out to that victim or call the police.
So resorting back to the vulnerable populations that are at risk for falling victim to human trafficking, I mentioned that it is actually unrestricted social media users who are highly at risk. So here are some social media do's and don'ts. So number one, please be aware of followers. Not just who you are following, but also who is following you. When it comes to social media, it is a showcasing of our lives. Usually our personal lives are displayed on social media. And if someone who you don't know or a stranger has access to that, it can easily become a dangerous situation. So do not post your location. On social media apps such as Instagram, Facebook, a simple tap of a location can not only just give away the zip code, but the entire write-up and layout of where you actually are, which is extremely dangerous. Avoid communication with strangers. Oftentimes on the internet, we find it that we may find someone who looks like us or seems very relatable to us, but you really want to be careful because communicating with strangers is ultimately always dangerous. We're taught that from a very young age, don't talk to strangers. And it's true, especially through social media. And number four, make your page private. If you find yourself, not always having the time to check through who's viewing you or who's following you, you can always make your page private. And making your page private allows for you to be able to review that person's page before you allow them into your safe space. So media versus realistic depictions of human trafficking is a huge, huge, huge deal, especially in the Hollywood industry. So if you're into action films or, you really enjoy films of violence at times, the false depictions in a movie such as Taken 1 and 2 are all false depictions of human trafficking. So I know if you have watched it and if you haven't, the father actually is able to come and rescue his daughter from sex trafficking. Just like we had mentioned before, not every victim has family. Not every victim has a connection to the family or, any contact to the family. So it could be very unrealistic that they have their dad or anyone necessarily as a superhero to come and save them from these situations. Human trafficking is an ongoing enforcement, so it can last for weeks, months, and even years. And some people are never, freed from human trafficking. The visual misinterpretation of human trafficking is also the visuals of a strange man and a white minivan coming to kidnap you. And although that could possibly be true, trafficking, as we mentioned before, could easily happen through a screen, through technology, even friendships, relationships. The lack of African American representation as victims for human trafficking is extremely alarming, especially as you can see the numbers and the propaganda that is used for human trafficking. It does not show African Americans as true victims. It doesn't represent them at all. Traffickers do not have a certain look or age. It is actually a known fact that 70% of traffickers are in fact male, but traffickers could also be females. They do not always have to be, older. They could be younger. So please be alert and have your radar out for anyone.
Yes, and just to add really quickly on top of what Kendra said, a lot of traffickers will have sidekicks that are women, and they will use these women, these HBICs, as we'll call them, who started off as victims, who kind of earned their way to be like the trafficker's favorite, and they'll use that woman to go out and to scout young girls as well. So a lot of traffickers do have sidekicks, so that's definitely something to look out for. So next we want to get into a question based on the information that we gave you guys, and we just wanted to know, is there a woman in your life that you love, and how often does the safety of this woman cross your mind? So if you guys want to kind of reflect on that internally, what we would love if you guys put your answers in the chat. That would be awesome. But is there a woman in your life that you love? And how often does the safety of this woman cross your mind? So we'll give you guys about a minute or two to we hope you'll interact and put your answers in the chat. Kendra, did you want to check the chat for me?
Yes, so we have, mom, grandma, aunt, etc., and that she's concerned daily. And then I stated that I often think about the safety of my cousin and her daughter, and there are some that are more than others for sure. Someone said especially their nieces. Multiple women in my life, safety is a constant concern for me. Definitely agree. I really love that everyone is, stating that they are concerned and that they do think about the safety of their loved ones or a woman in mind.
Yes, love it. And the reason why we asked this question is because when we talk about Black women and when we're talking about a human topic such as human trafficking, when we talk about the safety of Black women, this is a very prevalent topic within our community because I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough. And it's like when we're talking about human and sex trafficking, again, we think about white girls, white women, but you saw the statistics. Majority of the girls and young women being trafficked are Black. And because we lack awareness and because we lack that knowledge, we don't even know how to prevent these things from happening to our young girls. I'm pretty sure we see articles every day of young Black girls running away from home and things, or being prostitutes and things like that. But we never ask why, And I think asking this question kind of brings that community center to it all, to know that, we have to have that community piece when it comes to us as Black women, because we are the least valued and the most targeted, if you want us to be honest. So thank you guys for sharing your answers. We really appreciate it.
And before we even dive into the next slide, Ms. Tamika Smith commented something that I really enjoyed. So it says, yes, my mother. I think about her safety every so often now that she's getting older. never thought about her being a victim of sexual assault or being abducted by a sex trafficker. And I really like that you were able to point that out, because oftentimes, with age, we eliminate some crimes or some situations that could occur. And I think that that is just, also from the media or also from propaganda, because we never really see any elderly or see any older people who are falling victim to these things. So I really like that you mentioned that. And diving into this slide, we have Centoya Brown. Centoya Brown is known by many to be almost the face of human trafficking. She was actually convicted with first degree or premeditated murder at the age of 16 for murdering basically a client of hers. She was very fearful for her life and thought that this individual was going to kill her with the gun that he had visible. She felt threatened. She had ran away from home a while back. She was in a relationship with this guy, and who actually later became almost her pimp. And she had been going through the prostitution ring for the bulk of her teenage years. She claims that she has never really felt loved and just struggled with feeling loved. And I think her story is a great depiction of human trafficking and how the system is working diligently to do better with, properly prosecuting this crime.
So now we're just going to watch a small video, and we want you guys to really pay attention to the things that they're saying about Centoya, because you guys can get a sense of what she experienced and what she was going through.
Yeah, it's over now. I got eyes.
Centoya Brown shot Johnny out.
I shot him because I thought he was gonna shoot me.
This young woman didn't get a fair shake.
She was a 16-year-old runaway, beaten, pimped, and raped.
When you go through sexual abuse as a child, you build hate. I really just never felt like anybody loved me.
In 2004, she was considered a prostitute. Today, she would be considered a victim of sexual predators, violence.
So we just wanted to show a small clip of that video just for you guys to get an understanding of what a lot of victims of sexual assault, sexual abuse, sex trafficking go through. She was a victim, but when she got convicted, she wasn't looked at as a victim. She was looked at as a murderer. But if you hear her story, you know that she was a victim, that she didn't have community, she didn't have people around her who loved her, which is why she became a prostitute, which is why she ended up being trafficked ultimately. So we also have another story, which is very similar to Centoya's story, but it is Baltimore based. So this story does not have a video, but it is an article. And we'll just go through it briefly, but her story is very similar to Centoya. She was 16, she's anonymous, so she did not want her name or her face to be exposed. I'm pretty sure for safety reasons, but she was just like Centoya. She was 16 years old. She ended up becoming a drug addict, and from there, her trafficker sought her out, and she was one of those victims who moved around state from state. And she sat down with Rick Ritter, CBS, in 2019 to tell her story. Again, she wanted to remain anonymous, but she was sexually abused. She was physically abused. She had a trafficker who moved her around and sold her to different people. And she went through a lot. She was a young girl. She was very lost, and she didn't have that community piece or that love and stability. So she kind of took that other route. And with that, she became a vulnerable population, as we talked about earlier. So we just wanted to emphasize that there are so many Centoya Browns in this world. There are so many young girls who easily fall victim to human and sex trafficking, especially Black girls. And we can get into a little bit more, but I just want us to kind of move along so we could talk about healing center engagement and ways we can kind of come together and piece together how we're going to be able to help women, help young girls like Centoya and this lovely lady right here who decided to remain anonymous. So let's just give me 1 second as I get back into give me 1 second. Sorry for the technical difficulties, guys. It's not expecting all of this. And thank you guys so much for being patient while I have to go back through this presentation.
In the meantime, I hope that you all are truly enjoying and gathering a lot of information from this presentation. It's really sad that this is not talked about often, and I hope that if anything, you're able to gather a lot of information from our presentation. And we are going to dive into healing-centered engagement. I am more than my trauma. So with using cultural and community approaches to healing, this will show that, everyone is in fact more than their trauma, and that you are not alone when going through your trauma, and that there's more to life than just the abuse or the pain and, feelings of betrayal that they have went through, that there is in fact a new way of life, and healing is true and it is real. The feeling of not being alone. So I actually stated earlier in the presentation that I have created a nonprofit human trafficking or awareness program, and it is entitled She's Not for Sale. I started this project when I was in my 10th grade year, so in the year of 2018, 2019, and it has finally and officially been approved for the Girl Scout Gold Award in August 2021. I've spent over 100+ research and service hours. I've collaborated with different Black-owned businesses such as the DOT Project. I've also had the chance to, collaborate with Mona's House, which is a great house that is based in Buffalo, New York, for victims of human trafficking to basically be rehabilitated. And that is a form of healing-centered engagement. And overall, I was able to educate over 60 African-American females, specifically in high school age, on human trafficking awareness in Baltimore City. So how can we all stay aware? So as mentioned before, all the information that you are gathering from this presentation, share it with others, share it with your child, share it with, your loved ones, because we all need to be better educated. Parents, know your child's social circle. You should always know up to 1 or 3 people that your child remotely hang around often. Have their phone numbers, have their parents' phone numbers, just in case of an emergency. Check use smartphones. There's nothing wrong with monitoring, who your child is talking to, monitoring, the usage of social media. Are you communicating with strangers? Actively communicate with your child. Ask them these questions. And for teens and children, understand the signs of abuse and trafficking, especially abuse in relationships. Share your location with 1 to 3 trusted friends, and educate yourself and your friends. And for both parties, if you notice something greatly unusual, say something.
Now, using the healing-centered engagement approach, like we said, this is basically a way to culturally uplift our community, specifically the African-American community, by creating safe spaces such as Mona House and things like that to help women and young girls such as Centoya Brown and other victims of human and sex trafficking, just to bring that piece of family and that piece of community so they don't feel like they are going through their trauma alone.
And going back to noticing something unusual, never hesitate to utilize the wonderful privilege that we have of having cell phones. Immediately call the police. 911 is always a go-to for seeing something that is unusual or unsafe. And human trafficking hotline that we have listed here not only contacts the police, but also works to rehabilitate victims. Do not break a trafficking operation or anything that you see to be remotely unusual or unsafe without the authorities' assistance.
And let's make sure our young girls and women are safe, because that was our ultimate goal of this presentation. And we just want to say thank you guys for taking the time out to listen to us. We hope that you take something away from this presentation to where as though you can go back and tell your aunts, your uncles, your siblings, whoever may not know about what we just shared with you guys, because this is a very important conversation, important topic to have. And this is where you can find us personally. So if you guys want to take a screenshot really quickly, this is all our information, our socials, our emails. So if you want to contact us personally, you can. And I'm gonna give it like 10 more seconds.
Thank you, everyone. I really hope that you enjoy, and never hesitate to message or email any of us. We're definitely here to share information. We put a lot of research, well, months of research into, mastering human trafficking, and it was definitely enjoyable to be able to share it with everyone today.
Yes, thank you again. And this is where you can find Healing Youth Alliance's information. So go ahead real quick, screenshot this, write it down really, really quickly, because I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We have about 2 minutes, a minute and a half to get a little bit of feedback. We would love to hear what you guys have to say. But if you can put it in the chat, please do put it in the chat. But if you feel like you cannot put it in the chat, you just have to come off mute. We will honestly really, really appreciate it. But thank you guys so much.
Thank you for your presentation.